You presided over the trial of Jesus of Nazareth. Before that day, had you heard of him?
Not really. Judea was awash with self-proclaimed prophets and religious agitators. My intelligence network tracked troublemakers, but this Galilean was unremarkable until that morning. I had reports of crowds following him, yes, but unlike the zealots, he preached no violence against Rome. He seemed harmless, a wandering teacher with peculiar ideas. Had the Sanhedrin not been so insistent, he might have remained beneath my notice. Galilee was technically Herod Antipas's jurisdiction, which is why I initially attempted to redirect the matter.
Imagine, if you will, it's the morning of Passover in Jerusalem, around 30 CE. The city is packed with pilgrims, tensions are running high, and you're the Roman governor responsible for keeping order. Suddenly, the Jewish religious authorities drag a Galilean preacher to your doorstep, demanding his execution. You find no evidence of the crimes they claim, yet they threaten to report you to Caesar if you don't comply. In the next few hours, your decision will echo through eternity. This was Pontius Pilate. And today, we're sitting down with one of history's most controversial figures to understand what really happened in that courtroom 2,000 years ago. Who was this man who literally held the fate of Christianity in his hands? Pilate was a Roman of the equestrian order, a middle rank of the Roman nobility from central Italy, a career administrator who'd climbed the ranks to become prefect of Judea, one of the empire's most volatile provinces. He was likely trained as a soldier, educated in Roman law, and conditioned to prioritize order above all else. Yet he was also a man caught between impossible choices: uphold Roman justice or maintain political survival, follow his conscience or serve imperial interests. Here's what makes Pilate so fascinating and so human. Contemporary sources describe him as both inflexible, stubborn, and cruel, and as a conflicted leader who desperately tried to avoid executing a man he believed was innocent. He was the kind of administrator who'd build aqueducts and temples to serve his people, yet also massacre protesters when they challenged his authority. A pragmatist who asked, "What is truth?" when confronted with claims about divine kingdoms, yet whose own wife warned him in a dream to stay away from Jesus. For nearly 2,000 years, Pilate's decision to authorize Jesus' crucifixion has shaped how billions of people understand justice, power, and moral courage. Some Christian traditions remember him as a weak politician who chose convenience over righteousness. Others, particularly in Ethiopia, actually venerate him as a saint who eventually found faith. But what did Pilate himself think he was doing that day? How did a routine provincial trial become the pivot point of human history? Today we're going to explore those impossible questions. We'll ask Pilate about the political pressures that shaped his decision, the religious tensions that made Judea ungovernable, and whether he truly believed Jesus was innocent or perhaps something more. We'll confront him about washing his hands while authorizing an execution, challenge him on the gap between Roman ideals and imperial realities, and discover what it felt like to be the man who tried to stay neutral in the trial of the ages. This is Hypothetically Speaking. I'm your host, William Stratton, and this is my conversation with Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor who asked about truth, chose political survival, and inadvertently changed the world forever. Governor Pilate, thank you for joining us.
Gratias tibi ago. Mihi est voluptas. Expecto ut veritatem patefaciam.
Let's begin with context. What was your primary role as governor of Judea, and how would you describe the political climate when you arrived?
My title was prefect of Judea, a provincial appointment granted by Emperor Tiberius himself. Rome expected two things from me: maintain order and ensure taxes flowed to the imperial treasury. The political climate? Volatile. The Jews are a proud people with ancient customs, utterly resistant to Roman ways. Their religious sensibilities made governance challenging. They harbor messianic hopes for liberation from Rome, which breeds constant suspicion. Every festival was a potential uprising. Every religious leader a potential instigator. My mandate was simple: preserve Roman authority at all costs.
Governor History paints a certain picture, a weak man bowing to the mob. But I want to hear it raw, unfiltered. Take us back to that day in Jerusalem. Beyond the religious fervour, what were the underlying political tensions you were sensing? Judea wasn't exactly a Roman Riviera, was it?
Riviera? Hardly. Judea was a festering wound, always threatening to erupt. The religious fanatics, the simmering resentment against Roman rule, it was a constant balancing act. That day, the air was thick with it. Passover always brought the zealots out of the woodwork, their messianic fantasies bubbling to the surface. The so-called religious fervor you mention was inextricably linked to political aspirations. Believe me, they yearned for a king to overthrow us.
You presided over the trial of Jesus of Nazareth. Before that day, had you heard of him?
Not really. Judea was awash with self-proclaimed prophets and religious agitators. My intelligence network tracked troublemakers, but this Galilean was unremarkable until that morning. I had reports of crowds following him, yes, but unlike the zealots, he preached no violence against Rome. He seemed harmless, a wandering teacher with peculiar ideas. Had the Sanhedrin not been so insistent, he might have remained beneath my notice. Galilee was technically Herod Antipas's jurisdiction, which is why I initially attempted to redirect the matter.
You were a seasoned administrator. Did the case of Jesus of Nazareth strike you as unusual from the start? A carpenter stirring this much trouble? What were your initial impressions of this man and the charges levelled against him by the Sanhedrin?
Unusual? Yes and no. We dealt with self-proclaimed prophets and miracle workers regularly. Most fizzled out. But this one, there was a different intensity around him. The Sanhedrin, usually bickering amongst themselves, were united in their desire to see him gone. That raised a flag. Their charges, sedition, claiming kingship, serious enough to warrant attention, even if the man himself didn't fit the typical image of a revolutionary. He was strangely detached, almost serene amidst their accusations.
Walk us through that morning. When Jesus was brought before you, what were the charges?
The charges were deliberately framed to force my hand. The Jewish council knew well that their religious complaints, blasphemy and claiming divinity, held no interest for Rome. So they presented him as a political rebel, claiming he declared himself king of the Jews and forbade tribute to Caesar. These were capital offenses that threatened Roman sovereignty, charges I could not ignore, regardless of their thin evidence. It was cleverly done. They transformed their religious grievance into a political matter, requiring imperial intervention.
You questioned him directly. What was your impression of Jesus during the interrogation?
In my years administering justice, I've questioned countless criminals. The guilty plead, bargain, or defame their accusers. This man did none of these things. His calm demeanor was unsettling. When I asked if he was indeed their king, he spoke of truth and kingdoms not of this world, philosophical abstractions that held no legal significance. Most puzzling was his refusal to defend himself against charges that would lead to his execution. I've sentenced many men to death, but none who seemed so unconcerned with their fate. He was either a madman or something I could not comprehend.
You famously asked, "What is truth?"
You mistake a rhetorical dismissal for philosophical inquiry. When he claimed to bear witness to the truth, I recognized the language of Greek philosophers who had wasted hours in the forums of Rome debating abstract concepts. What relevance did truth have in a pragmatic legal proceeding? I am a Roman governor, not an Athenian philosopher. My concern was maintaining order and determining whether this man posed a genuine threat to Roman rule. Theoretical truths are luxuries for those without responsibility. I dealt in the concrete realities of governance.
You went to considerable lengths to avoid condemning Jesus, the Passover custom sending him to Herod. Were these genuine attempts at seeking justice or political maneuvering to quell a potential uprising and protect your own position? Be honest, Governor. Your legacy hangs on this.
Justice? In a conquered territory? You have a naive understanding of Roman governance. My priority was Rome, maintaining order. If I could achieve that without unnecessary bloodshed, so much the better. The Passover custom was a calculated risk. Sending him to Herod, that was passing the buck, plain and simple. Let the local puppet deal with his own religious nuisance. If he found him harmless, problem solved for me.
But you didn't find him entirely harmless, did you? You questioned him extensively. The Sanhedrin accused him of sedition, of claiming to be king of the Jews. Did you truly believe he posed a tangible threat to Roman authority? Or were you more concerned about the perception of a threat among the local populace and its potential to escalate into open revolt?
The man himself? No, I didn't see him leading legions against Rome, but the idea he represented, the fervor he ignited, that was dangerous. Kingship in Judea always meant rebellion against Caesar. The perception, as you say, was the real threat. A large-scale uprising during Passover? That would have brought the legions down on me, a black mark on my record. My concern was pragmatic, maintaining control.
Why did you offer the crowd a choice between Barabbas and Jesus? Was that a common custom?
Releasing a prisoner during their Passover festival was a calculated political gesture, goodwill from Rome that cost us little. By offering this notorious rebel Barabbas alongside Jesus, I expected the contrast to be obvious. Barabbas was an actual insurrectionist with blood on his hands. I thought the crowd would surely choose the harmless teacher over the violent revolutionary. It was a miscalculation. I underestimated the influence of the religious authorities over the mob and their determination to eliminate Jesus. When they chose Barabbas, I realized the depth of their animosity toward the Nazarene.
That crowd's demand for Barabbas, a known insurrectionist, a murderer, over Jesus is a pivotal point. Did you attempt to reason with them? What was the turning point where you realized their will, however irrational, would prevail?
Reason with a mob whipped into a frenzy by their priests? You might as well reason with the Sirocco. I tried. I appealed to their sense of, well, whatever sense they possessed. But the cries for Barabbas were deafening, orchestrated. The turning point? When I saw the glint of fanaticism in their eyes, the unwavering hatred for this Jesus, coupled with the veiled threats from their leaders about reporting me to Rome for leniency towards a perceived traitor. My authority was on a knife's edge.
You declared, "I find no basis for a charge against him, so why authorize the crucifixion?"
You oversimplify the complexities of provincial administration. I was positioned between Roman interests and local stability. Yes, I found insufficient evidence for treason, but the situation was deteriorating rapidly. The crowd was verging on riot during Passover, when Jerusalem's population swelled tenfold. The religious leaders threatened to report me to Caesar for releasing a man who made himself king. Previous complaints about my governance had already reached Rome. Another incident could have ended my career, or worse. The death of one obscure Galilean preacher against potential widespread unrest. What would you have done? The empire demands order above all.
You famously washed your hands, declaring yourself innocent of Jesus' blood. Was this a genuine moral stance, a moment of belated conscience, or a theatrical gesture to absolve yourself in the eyes of history? Did you truly believe it would achieve either?
Moral stance? Perhaps a flicker of it, buried deep beneath layers of Roman pragmatism. But primarily, it was a gesture, a symbolic gesture they would understand, a public display to show I wasn't acting out of personal malice, that I was yielding to the will of the people, however manipulated. Their own customs involve ritual purification. I wanted the record to show that I considered this execution their responsibility, not Rome's. Did it absolve me? In legal terms, I acted within my authority. The law cares nothing for personal conscience. I rendered judgment according to the political necessities of maintaining order in a volatile province. History may judge me for making expedient choices, but Rome demanded results, not moral purity. Every governor faces such compromises. Absolve myself? Perhaps a futile hope. I knew deep down the responsibility wouldn't simply wash away with the water. But what else could I do? Stand against a mob and risk a full-scale revolt? Rome wouldn't have thanked me for that.
How much did the pressure from the religious leaders and the crowd influence your decision?
I am a Roman official, not some weak provincial swayed by local opinions. But I would be a fool to ignore political realities. The high priest Caiaphas was well connected in Rome. Their accusation, "If you release this man, you are no friend of Caesar," was a thinly veiled threat to report me for failing to punish treason. My relationship with Emperor Tiberius was already strained after earlier incidents. And yes, the growing mob presents a practical concern. Passover riots had occurred before, requiring military intervention that would reflect poorly on my administration. I made a pragmatic decision, nothing more.
Looking back, what was the biggest miscalculation you made in handling this situation? What moment, if handled differently, might have led to a different outcome?
Perhaps underestimating the influence of the Sanhedrin over the populace. Or maybe I should have trusted my initial instinct that this Jesus was more of a spiritual leader than a political threat, and found a way to dismiss the charges entirely. But the pressure, it was relentless.
Beyond the political ramifications, did anything about Jesus himself, his demeanor, his words, resonate with you personally? That talk of truth, it seemed to trouble you. Did you grapple with the possibility that there was more to him than a mere rabble-rouser?
He was different. His quiet dignity under duress, his refusal to engage in petty squabbles. It was unlike anyone I'd encountered in that volatile region. And yes, that talk of truth, it lingered. In a world built on power and manipulation, the concept was elusive. Was I troubled? Perhaps intrigued is a better word. A fleeting curiosity about a man who seemed to possess an inner conviction I rarely witnessed.
Let's circle back on that question you posed. Duns, what is truth? It echoes through the ages. Was that a moment of genuine philosophical inquiry from a Roman administrator, or a cynical dismissal of the entire messy situation? What were you truly searching for in that moment?
Cynicism, perhaps, honed by years of dealing with endless lies and self-serving agendas. But maybe there was a sliver of genuine inquiry in there too. Faced with a man who claimed to embody it, yet stood accused of crimes against the very order I upheld. The irony wasn't lost on me. What was truth in this twisted affair?
Looking back, do you believe Jesus was innocent? Or more than innocent?
Innocent of sedition against Rome? Yes, that much was evident. Had there been legitimate evidence of insurrection, I would have crushed it decisively, as I had done with other rebellions. As for being more than innocent, I've presided over countless trials. This one disturbed me. Something in his bearing, his words about truth and kingdoms beyond our understanding. My wife's dreams warned me against involvement with him. I've encountered many religious fanatics in Judea, but none like him. I'm a practical man, not given to superstition. Yet, what does it matter now? The decision was made for reasons of state. That is all a governor can do.
The inscription on the cross, King of the Jews, has been interpreted in various ways. What was the intent behind that specific wording? Was it mockery, a statement of Roman power, or something else entirely?
A bit of Roman sarcasm, I confess. A public declaration of the crime he was condemned for, a warning to anyone else with similar aspirations, but also a subtle jab at the Jewish leaders who insisted on this king being their downfall. Rome had the final say on who ruled or who didn't.
In the immediate aftermath of the crucifixion, what were your dominant emotions? Relief that the immediate crisis was over? A sense of unease? Did you ever anticipate the enduring impact this event would have?
Relief, certainly. The immediate threat had passed, but beneath that, a nagging unease, a feeling that something significant had occurred, though I couldn't have articulated it then. Enduring impact? Preposterous. Just another troublesome Jew dealt with. How could I have foreseen this global phenomenon?
History has not been entirely kind to Pontius Pilate. You're often portrayed as weak, indecisive, a man who chose expediency over justice. How do you perceive your role in this event, knowing the scrutiny and condemnation that have followed? Do you believe your actions were ultimately justifiable given the circumstances?
Is that what has happened? My name preserved because of one provincial troublemaker among hundreds I dealt with? How ironic. I served Rome for years in that difficult outpost. I built aqueducts, expanded commerce, maintained relative peace in a region prone to rebellion. Yet I'm remembered for this single judgment? Perhaps that's fitting. In that moment, facing that particular man, something extraordinary was unfolding that I failed to recognize. I was trained to maintain Roman power, not to discern prophets or gods. History is written by the victors, or in this case, the believers. I was a Roman governor in a volatile province, trying to maintain order. I made a decision based on the information and pressures before me. Justifiable? In the context of Roman realpolitik, perhaps. Morally, that's a question I've had eternity to ponder.
If you could speak directly to those who judge your actions today across millennia, what would you say? What crucial context or perspective do you believe is often overlooked?
I would tell them they weren't there. They didn't feel the weight of Roman authority on their shoulders, the threat of rebellion in the air. They judge with the benefit of hindsight, knowing the end of the story. I was operating in the moment, trying to prevent a larger catastrophe. My choices were between one man and widespread bloodshed. It was a terrible calculus, but one I believed necessary at the time. Let me make one last point. I governed a province where religious passions routinely erupted into violence. Rome demanded stability, not philosophical distinctions between truth and falsehood. Every decision I made affected thousands of lives under my authority. Those who judge from the comfort of posterity have never balanced imperial demands against local insurrection. The man Jesus spoke of kingdoms beyond this world. I dealt with the harsh realities of this one. Before condemning my choice, ask yourself what you would have done with a potential riot at your gates, religious leaders demanding blood, and the shadow of imperial displeasure hanging over your career. Governance requires difficult choices with imperfect information. I made mine.
Ultimately, Governor, what do you believe your legacy should be in relation to the crucifixion of Jesus of Nazareth? What single truth do you want history to remember about your involvement?
That I was a man caught between a rock and a hard place, trying to navigate the treacherous currents of Roman power and local fanaticism. I made a decision I believed was in the best interest of Rome, to prevent chaos. Whether it was the right decision, well, that is for others to debate. But understand the context. Understand the pressure.
Governor Pilate, thank you for your time and your candid responses. The debate, as you say, continues.
Mr. Stratton, I thank you for the opportunity to speak plainly at last. History has cast many shadows over my name, but today you've allowed me to bring some measure of clarity. Judgment is rarely simple, and choices made under pressure often outlive the moment in which they're made. I leave this conversation hoping that listeners will weigh the man, not just the moment. Thank you. Ave atque vale.
I've conducted hundreds of interviews, but few have left me as unsettled as this conversation with Pontius Pilate. Not because of what he said, but because of what his words reveal about the terrible complexity of moral decision-making under impossible circumstances. What struck me most was how human Pilate emerged. For 2 millennia, he's been painted as either a weak coward or calculating politician. But the man who sat across from me defied these simple characterizations. Here was a Roman administrator caught in a no-win scenario, forced to adjudicate a case that transcended normal governance. The religious leaders had masterfully reframed their theological dispute as political sedition, forcing Pilate into a position where any decision would compromise either his legal principles or political survival. Most compelling and troubling was Pilate's insistence on context. "You weren't there," he said, and that phrase haunts me. It's easy to condemn his actions from our modern perspective, knowing the full sweep of Christian history. But Pilate was making split-second decisions in a powder keg of religious and political tension. Consider his impossible calculation: one man's life against potential widespread bloodshed during Jerusalem's most volatile festival. His handwashing wasn't just theatrical. It was a desperate attempt to maintain moral clarity while making a choice he knew was fundamentally wrong. Perhaps most revealing was his famous question: what is truth? Beneath his dismissive explanation, I heard genuine confusion from a man confronted with claims about divine kingdoms. That question echoes through history because it captures something eternally human: our struggle to discern moral clarity when competing truths collide. Pilate may be Christianity's most reluctant catalyst. Unlike the apostles or religious leaders, he recognized something extraordinary about Jesus while feeling powerless to act. His declarations of Jesus' innocence became testimonies preserved for eternity. In trying to wash his hands of responsibility, he inadvertently created one of Christianity's most powerful symbols. I began expecting to confront a villain. I ended feeling pity for a man trapped by circumstances largely beyond his control. Pilate's tragedy isn't that he was uniquely evil, but ordinarily human. He made a terrible choice for understandable reasons, becoming an unwitting instrument in what Christians believe to be God's redemption plan. Pontius Pilate asked, "What is truth?" and walked away without waiting for an answer. 2,000 years later, we're still wrestling with both the question and the silence that followed. And that wraps up our journey through time with one of history's most fascinating figures. Thank you for watching, and if these conversations into our past have sparked your curiosity, please support our work by hitting the subscribe button to get our latest compelling interviews and analysis. Until then, remember that understanding our past helps illuminate our present. I'm your host, William Stratton, and this has been Hypothetically Speaking. See you next time.